Vamos a continuar, seguimos con la presentación de Nehal Nangia, que nos acompaña desde India, y ella va a hablar sobre Corporate Learning at Scale, aprendizaje corporativo a escala. Esta presentación es patrocinada por nuestros sponsors Plata, Speaks y Desire to Learn. La conferencia de Nehal será en inglés con traducción simultánea. Les pedimos seleccionen en el margen derecho superior de la pantalla la opción que más les convenga. Si quieren el idioma original, perfecto para cada uno, y si no, quienes quieren participar de la traducción simultánea al castellano, lo pueden hacer. Bienvenida, Nehal, a este FIAT 2022, todo tuyo.
Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining me today on this session on what matters most in L&D. My name is Nehal Nangia, and I lead learning and leadership research here at the Josh Person Company. In my role, I have the privilege to work with several global organizations on a lot of different topics like learning, leadership, talent, and employee experience. I am based out of India, and I've previously been employed with Deloitte Consulting in Ghana. Now, since most organizations have been on the L&D journey for a really long time, let's start with looking a little bit at the journey itself. Let's start with where it all started and where we are at right now. So this might sound familiar because it is in the 1990s when it all started, when organizations started to shift from classroom training to e-learning courses, which were essentially classroom training content recreated for online delivery in the form of course catalogs and online universities. Vendors like Skillsoft emerged at the time as market leaders to address this need. And then as the web grew through the 2000s, YouTube, lynda.com, and MOOCs absolutely disrupted the e-learning market. Now, in a decade that followed, organizations were focused on building integrated talent management solutions. They were building programs to integrate recruiting, performance management, internal mobility, leadership development, and succession management. Concurrently, organizations were also starting to focus on integrated talent-driven learning programs to support talent strategies, particularly in areas such as leadership development, onboarding, and career development. These long-term complex learning programs required competency analysis, complex blended learning activities, and new levels of integration with development planning and performance management. So essentially, they took a lot of time to build. Soon after, we saw a shift from building to curating. Organizations started to expand the focus not just on what people learn, also to how people learn. So they started moving towards delivering learning to where people are, meeting people where they are through digital learning. We saw a shift from content creation to curation and a shift towards providing scalable and democratized learning while giving learners flexibility and autonomy to create, share, and access learning at any time and anywhere. Now, the importance of continuous learning rather than episodic learning, the recognition that workers today are overwhelmed and they need learning that is not taking away from productivity, but adding to productivity, learning that is part of work itself, created momentum around this notion of learning in the flow of work, and that happened in 2018. What we saw in the past few years is that some pioneering organizations are tying learning in the flow of work to capabilities needed in the flow of work. So they're taking this notion a step further, shifting to how you reorganize learning to support the concept of capability academies. Organizations such as Bupa, Cemex, Novartis, Kraft Heinz, and Nordea Bank, they're starting to organize learning so that it is focused on business capabilities, not just a lot of content, but bringing together developmental assignments, credentials, certifications, and often networks of people who come together and share knowledge with each other and information with each other through capability academies. So we've seen the journey so far on what people learn, to how people learn, to invigorating a focus on how people can learn effectively. But we wanted to know, where is L&D headed next? So we launched a very big study, which is our biggest ever study on corporate learning at scale. We studied over 1,000 organizations, and I will share with you what we unpacked from our study. But before that, I am going to share with you a little bit about a Hollywood movie. Now, no points for guessing which movie I'm talking about, and I'm sure this is a bit of a surprise and you're wondering why I'm talking about why I'm talking, but I promise I will bring it home and put it in context. So I saw the biopic of the Williams sisters. Most of you may have seen it. It's had some rapturous reviews and some pointed dissents, but there's one thing about the movie that really struck me. Richard Williams pulled the Williams sisters out of the junior circuit arena at a time when they were having legendary success in under 12 tennis. He did that because he wanted them to get an education. He wanted them to pause and first hone their craft. He knew that the journey was long and he kept his eyes on the big picture. He knew that sports wasn't the end goal. It was the vehicle to having a better life. And for everyone in L&D today, these lessons hit home. Organizations today spend millions of dollars on corporate training, onboarding, content libraries, snazzy learning tools and technologies. Most organizations and HR tech vendors as well, we see that they're laser focused on enabling learning in the flow of work. Now it is important because that's how people learn, but they also need to pause and reflect and recognize that learning is not the end goal. The end goal is enabling growth, and that is where L&D organizations need to refocus and reprioritize efforts. Education and upskilling for the workforce today are more important than ever. And to do that, L&D professionals need to build new capabilities. They need to hone their craft to not just enable learning in the flow, but to ensure that learning flows into the right outcomes for individuals as well as for the business. And that, in fact, was the biggest theme in our study. So I am excited to share with you some early insights from the study, and let's dive in. We studied 94 practices in 9 broad areas of L&D in across over 1,000 organizations. Now, those are the 9 broad areas that we studied that you see on my screen, and the blue bars at the bottom indicate the percentage of organizations that told us that they're doing really well in each of those areas. Now, if you look at the percentages, they average to about 20%. So the good news is about 20% of organizations are excelling in all of these areas. What that also means is 1 out of every 5 organizations knows exactly what matters in L&D. They are leveraging the right L&D strategies to win the war for talent and to differentiate outcomes. Now, what that also means is about 80% of organizations are not there yet. About 80% of organizations are lagging in all areas of L&D. Now, we recognize that L&D functions today, compared to any other domain in HR, have leapfrogged years ahead on the reinvention journey. So if we think about it, L&D functions today, they are trying new approaches, adapting to remote work models, buying new tools, licensing new content, setting up digital academies, building skills taxonomies. They are experimenting with VR and AR programs. They are moving faster than ever. But the domain itself is changing so fast that L&D functions are struggling to keep up. So one of our goals with this study was also to understand what does L&D need to do to catch up. So when we studied the 9 broad areas and the practices within those areas, we also correlated those practices with talent, business, and innovation outcomes to identify what are the specific practices that have the strongest impact on driving business outcomes. What you will see on my screen now are the top 15 most impactful L&D practices. Now, it's a lot of text and it may be hard to read, and I don't expect you to read it. I will walk you through the key themes in just a second. But the reason why I put the slide here is because it is these practices that really crystallized for us. They were the eureka moment for us that told us where L&D is at right now and where exactly it needs to be. So the number 1 most impactful L&D practice today is providing extensive career growth options. At the same time, 5 out of 15 most impactful L&D practices also have to do with career growth. 4 out of 15 have to do with leadership development or coaching or mentoring. Another 4 out of 15 have to do with learning in the flow, and 2 have to do with the need for L&D to build new capabilities and experiment and hone their craft. What we're seeing is a big shift toward the outcomes. What we saw and what we validated in several conversations with L&D leaders and HR and talent leaders across the world is that what matters most is what people want from learning. Today, a third of the workforce is leaving every year. They're leaving in pursuit of better jobs, better careers, better lives. People want to grow. People want to grow in their careers. People want to grow as leaders, and they want to develop the skills and capabilities that will help them grow. Learning has the power and the responsibility to get them there, but most organizations have not been able to make that connection. What is missing today in L&D is indeed the connection between learning and growth. The focus on the end goal or the big picture is missing. Organizations today need to orchestrate a shift from a culture of learning to a culture of growth because employees want to grow. Learning can help them develop the capabilities they need to grow, but if you don't create the opportunities for them to grow, they will find them elsewhere outside your organization. Ultimately, growth is what matters the most, and enabling growth in the flow of work is L&D's new mission. With that, on the right side of my screen is our maturity model for learning. Our maturity model for learning is essentially a roadmap for organizations to assess and identify where they are at in the journey and how much further they need to go. So when we studied over 1,000 organizations, we saw that organizations fall into 4 different levels depending on the L&D practices they deploy. Level 1 are organizations that have the least effective practices and outcomes, and level 4 are organizations that have world-class learning practices and superior talent in business outcomes. And we see clear themes and attributes that define L&D practices of organizations at different levels of maturity. So let me start with level 1. Level 1 is what we call programmatic training. At this level, learning departments operate in a silo. They're focused on delivering mandatory, compliance-focused, and episodic or programmatic learning. The focus is on point-in-time training rather than enduring learning. Level 2 is when the shift happens from training to learning, and the scope increases to creating learning from broader audiences. So organizations start building content to integrate with different talent touchpoints. They also start buying content to make learning accessible to everyone. They invest in content libraries. They focus on learning discovery. They also invest in the LXP. Also, at this level, L&D is focused on cost efficiency, vendor management, tools and platforms, and content libraries. At this level, organizations make learning available to everyone. They make sure that people have access to the resources they need, but they also shift the onus on the employee to own their learning. We call this level self-directed learning. Now, on my screen, if you look at the percentages of organizations next to these levels, those add up to about 75%. What that means is about 3/4 of organizations are at these levels. So that's where most organizations are at. The transition to level 3 is actually the hardest for any organization. We call this level tailored development. At this level, organizations take the self-directed learning infrastructure and they go deeper. They curate, design, and integrate the wide range of self-development assets into journeys, career paths, and specific skill development solutions. They establish functional capability academies to build capabilities that are critical for the business and for people to advance in their career paths. CEMEX has a safety academy, for example. Capital One has built a cloud engineering academy, and Intel is developing its own AI academy. Now, this level is a fantastic level to be at. At this level, there is a culture of learning. Organizations truly invest in learning. They tailor development for each individual. But what is missing is that the connection between learning and growth is still not fully crystallized. That happens at level 4. So level 4 is the North Star where learning translates into career growth. We call this level facilitated growth. So at this level, organizations don't just leave it at you own your career, they facilitate career growth. They leverage systems of talent intelligence to identify which skills will be most critical in the future, and they help employees develop those skills so that employees can have long-term and future-proof careers with the organization, not just jobs. They create formalized pathways for people to move into new roles and high-valued careers. They have specific steps, including education and upskilling, how people can move from low-value, low-demand careers to high-value, high-demand careers. For example, Walmart has created pathways to move frontline store associates into pharmacist roles through education, certification, and training. Now, at this level, employees still own their careers, but the company operationalizes how employees can get to where they want to be in their careers through talent mobility, talent marketplaces, leadership development, career pathways, coaching, and mentoring. So level 4 organizations are organizations that facilitate growth in the flow of work. These are organizations that leverage the power of learning to enable growth for its entire workforce. These are organizations that we refer to as high maturity organizations. And what we also saw in our study is that maturity really matters. If you look at the screen, these level 4 organizations have significantly superior business, talent, and innovation outcomes as a result of the L&D practices they deploy. So maturity matters, and what denotes maturity today in L&D organizations is the ability of organizations to focus on facilitating growth. We call these organizations world-class learning organizations, and these organizations embody it as a core mission for L&D to enable not just learning, but growth in the flow of work. How that starts and how that looks like in practice is beginning with learning in the flow of work, because people need to learn, and that's how people learn. So L&D today has to enable learning in the flow. That's where you begin. To develop business critical capabilities, you also need to support leadership development at all levels. You need to construct pathways for people to move from one point to another in their careers. L&D needs to help everyone grow as a whole person, whether in their jobs, whether in their careers, or as leaders. L&D should help individuals unleash their potential and help create opportunities inside the organization to grow. You need to move from the how to the what of learning, and to what is it that people want from learning. You need to drive outcomes that learners want and businesses need. You need to build L&D capabilities, create structures and processes that are flexible and tied to learning needs. You need to try out and experiment with new tools and build a learning tech infrastructure that is simple, scalable, and easy to use, not one that is overwhelming for your learners. Learning in the flow of work is the how. You need to design programs. You need to democratize access to coaching and learning, and to support the development of critical business and leadership skills. Ultimately, you need to create opportunities for learners to use the skills they learn to grow and advance their careers within the organization. That is what the learning organizations today need to focus on, and that is something that organizations cannot lose sight of. Ultimately, wrapping it up with calls to action, these are few things that need to be the laser focus for L&D organizations today. Organizations need to start with building capabilities in the HR function. Essentially, if you have to build capabilities in the organization, you need to start with building capabilities in L&D. These are all new capabilities, a new set of capabilities that L&D needs to develop. So you need to invest in learning for the learning function. Then identify critical business capabilities that will support long-term careers for your workforce. You need to invest in developing leadership capabilities and help everyone be successful and grow in the flow of work. Organizations need to move from a culture of learning to a culture of growth, because employees want to grow. Learning can help them develop the skills they need to grow, and at the same time, we need to create the opportunities so that we don't lose our talent to the talent crisis of today, and that is only going to get worse in the future. So that is a wrap on what I wanted to share with you. We will be releasing the full study next month, so stay tuned for that. If you have any thoughts, feedback, or questions, we would love to hear from you. Thank you and have a fantastic conference.
Muchísimas gracias, Nehal, por tu conferencia, por tu predisposición y por compartir con nosotros en este FIAT 2022 toda la experiencia.